Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Convos.dev. My name is Chris.
I'm Jess, and today we're going to be talking about what tips and tricks you have for when you're trying to onboard onto a new large code base. And I think part of this is because I was thinking about like when you're working with AI, like what you might ask it as you're trying to
Mm,
use AI to learn a code base instead of just like having it do stuff for you. But also I was just thinking about like my previous parts of my career where I think that was like one of the bigger things I struggled with, and I was like, I would like to talk with Chris about this.
yeah, maybe I'll start more philosophical and then we can move to practical if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, let's do it.
Um, yeah, I think one thing is like just to be patient in that learning journey. Like a lot of times you just want to prove yourself very quickly.
Yeah,
And so you start moving quicker than you understand. And so like taking a couple of days to really grok what's going on before you start, making changes. If you want to add some stuff, do, very small tasks to start with or something like that. And sometimes if you have an onboarding buddy or something, they can help you with that to where they're actually saying like, hey, you can ask them, hey, is there something small I could do right now to kind of understand this little section? But I think overall, like that mental mindset of just like, you don't have to prove yourself in the first 48 hours. Like they
yeah,
hired you for a reason. And so when you step into that role, like be willing to take your time to learn it. It's better to learn it and then move than to move, too quickly. Maybe that like that philosophical mindset for me is almost as important, if not more important, than how you actually get to grokking it all.
I like that. Now go into the practical because I only care about the practical.
Oh, sorry. My bad. Scratch that. You can delete that whole section.
No, I like that.
Uh,
I think I'm just so impatient. Okay, I think what you said, hopefully, I would like to think that everyone takes that as a given, but you're right. I think there's a lot of people who would feel as if they were pressured if they're starting a new job to like grok a code base quickly. But
yeah.
I think I'm more lenient on myself than you are to yourself. So it's always been a given for me, but maybe not for you.
Yeah. I'm like within the first 6 hours, like, why haven't I pushed a PR yet?
And I'm
Um,
just sitting there like chilling.
I just need to take more Jess vibes for my coding journey. Yeah, I think as far as like some practical tips, one is more like maybe from the other side, like from an employee side or from somebody who's
Yeah,
been at a company for a bit. I think it's really helpful to have really helpful internal docs.
yeah,
Sometimes like there are a couple of like there's a open source repo we use or we maintain called React Email, and we just redid the whole contribution guide. And there's a whole just like 3 or 4 pages worth of explaining how everything's structured, how to run everything, like why we're using the tools we're using, and that kind of internal documentation on an open source project or within a larger code base is super helpful, not just for people but also for AI. So like when you're prompting the code base, like it can be really helpful to have that kind of step by step, and it can compress it even more. So that's one thing that you can't really control coming into a code base. Two would be like take time when you're stepping into that to find all the friction points and then write
yeah,
those down, because a lot of times you can be the person who helps the next person who's coming up
yeah.
behind you. And that's the time to know, because once you start to get familiar, you lose that friction because you just kind of know where stuff is.
For the documentation, what was it called? React email?
Yeah.
Okay. So like let's get specific, right? So you said you just redid that documentation. How did you structure it? Do you start with the overall like architecture diagram, and then maybe there's like always a section for route handling, there's always a section for like how authentication works. Like what are the big chunks of which you're locating conceptual things to explain? Then like once you explain the conceptual things, like the big chunks, then do you start pointing people into specific files or even give an example of like a gnarly bug? Maybe also like to rephrase the question, if you were a senior software engineer trying to explain the code base to a junior dev, in what train of logical thought would you break it down for them?
I basically came in as a reviewer on this contribution guide, so I don't want to make it sound like I did the whole thing, but we did kind of restructure a decent amount when I looked at it, because what you're trying to do in this case, it's an open source project, and it may
Yeah,
very well be the person's first time contributing to open source. But also, if you're more advanced, you don't want to read, too much. So we have basically a getting started section that breaks off, everything down into chunks and allows you to jump to what you need. Kind of in the side panel, we have a getting started section that overviews what the whole guide is about, like how to report bugs, how to contribute code, what the whole code base overview is, how to get development working. So those are kind of the sections, and we have links to all the individual sections within that. And if you want to, you can just go next, next, next and read all of that, but you may not want to. So some basic rules about opening issues, pull requests, that's mostly for kind of new developers. But the code base overview goes over the top level directories, kind of what lives in each section, how to enable certain things, how to like core pack, making sure that that's what we're using, why we're using Turbo Repo, showing how to use the React email CLI, showing testing and linting, why we chose the things we did, and then how to actually build it, along with some other kind of details around like how we like work with CommonJS and ES modules. And so there's some more details in there, and you can kind of go deeper into each of those, but installing stuff, where to build, how to run tests. So that's at least how we did it, where the getting started page essentially allows you to jump to the sections you need. And if you want to, you can just read straight through it and kind of get it step by step.
That's really interesting. Because as you were talking, I was like, my experience with onboarding onto a code base has been different. But it's because, right, I've had two full-time software engineering jobs in my life, and that was Microsoft and DoorDash. And they were two very different things, because in DoorDash, we were starting an entire like web service from scratch, like building from ground zero. So that was great. Microsoft was different. Like it was a very legacy old code base. So I think when I was thinking about onboarding onto a code base, a lot of my experience had come from working on Microsoft OneNote. As you can tell with Microsoft, there's so much more complexity. Even understanding their staging and testing environments, there were like multiple different staging and testing environments. Like there was one that was specifically for government, or maybe even military, like an environment that had to be more locked down, and that was its own like little testing environment. They had all these different names, and I didn't even learn them until a year into my job. Working on OneNote, I spent maybe 3 weeks understanding the way that the node structures. Like it took me so long to figure out how these nodes work, because I'd have to test like, okay, what happens if I move this text over here? It's a very different experience between a old corporate code base versus like a newer, like probably smaller tool.
I do think that you kind of owe it to people behind you as you learn new things to write docs. And that's something I've always really tried to do myself, even if it's just docs for me. Like I have a whole obsidian of docs for myself for things where I'll go back to and be like, I know I ran into this before. And AI can really help you with that too. Like you can just talk it out very briefly and say like, hey, write this in like steps for me. And so I've done that before where I'll just open Super Whisper or something like that and just start talking and say like, hey, here's kind of what I did. Here's what I ran into. Just write this all into some kind of documentation steps, close it down and move on. So it's not like it has to take a ton of time, but even something as simple as that can be a real help to those coming after, even if that person coming after is you later on.
I think every developer probably outwardly agreed to that, because, developer culture is all about documentation and we want to pass things along. But I wonder how many developers would actually agree with that in terms of what they're willing to spend their time doing. Because outwardly, philosophically, I agree with that, right? If I'm the one having to write the docs though, because I think I have a little bit of a pessimistic outlook, which is like, this is going to change. The name of this file is going to get changed. It's going to get refactored soon. All of this in maybe even 1 or 2 months, depending on how fast your engineering team is iterating, is going to be outdated. And so it just feels like such a waste of time to do it. So that's why probably documentation tends to be higher level to try to preserve itself for longer. But that also means the details are lost too. It's a very difficult problem.
As somebody who's written docs for 8 years professionally, like, yeah, it's, the maintenance kills you. But like even writing basic little run books, like we at Recent, we have a bunch of run books for basically everything within Notion. And so anytime I'm trying to do something, I'll just search that. And if I can't find it, then I just write it when I do it, because I have to go through the steps anyhow. So it's not hard to just write it down. And yeah, it may be out of date by the time the next person sees it. But the first thing they'll probably do is also search for run books. So it has to kind of be a group effort or it's really not worth it. And then if it's somewhere shared, then you can kind of collectively keep it up to date. And as the next person comes, they'll update that as well. But if nothing is ever there, then every time you're trying to do anything, you're always starting at scratch. And maybe some of it is like senior devs like to protect that, knowledge. I don't know. That may be also pessimistic, but I think most of it's just they don't want, they don't have the time. They want to work on whatever they're doing, which is also what usually junior devs want to do too. So it kind of takes a corporate culture of like, we're going to help each other along. And yeah, it may not be as detailed as you need it to be by the time you get there, but if you can add a little bit and the next person can add a little bit, we're all just working together, you know?
I like that. Yeah, and because we always bring up AI of some sort into our podcast so far, I'm actually because you mentioned right, like now it's like you can open up Super Whisper. Is that the Mac? Is that the Mac Super Whisper that you brought up in our first episode? Or is it
I can't remember if
something
I've talked
else?
about Super Whisper. I've talked about Mac Whisper, but
Mac Whisper.
this is
Okay,
something different. But yeah,
so, the same concept, right? Like you talk
more
to it and
whispering.
it more whispering. But like, besides that, like I wonder if there's any other more formalized tools that can like compile the Git commits or the PR changes and then kind of do its AI thing and turn that into some sort of documentation. I mean, that would legitimately be a very useful form of AI for me, where I don't feel like I'm losing out on developer skills by like trusting AI, but it's legitimately like a maintenance thing where I'm like,
Hmm.
you it would be super helpful if I can just have documentation generated or at least boilerplate and then I can go in and take a look.
Are there any rules that you might add privately, like for yourself, like when you're starting to onboard, to where like, hey, if I ask you questions, make sure you whatever. Is there something like that that you think might be useful? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. There's like again, it depends on the depth of the code base, like how
Yeah.
tenured the code base is. But like there's the big ones, right? Is this a monolith or microservices? Is it Dockerized? Like, how does the CI/CD deployment pipeline work? How is authentication handled? How is like routing handled? Like a lot of the core basic things, I think maybe I would put that into a rule and then I could just type out like explain this code base to me and it would kind of I wouldn't have to type out that prompt every time.
Yeah.
I don't know how often I'm onboarding onto such complex code bases, though. I mean, if you are onboarding to code bases is most likely more simple open source projects, probably. So I don't think you need that level of depth.
Well, you want to jump into our tool talk? I see you've got this app called freeplay.ai, which I've never heard of before. So,
Yeah. I recently like came across this tool and it's like it's in the area of like AI observability, which is interesting because I've never thought about like, oh, you have observability tools for a lot of like, pre-AI tools, and then I never thought, okay, now AI is here, and we have to like, if you're baking that into your code base, you have like a chatbot of some sort, or you're making OpenAI API calls and stuff like that, you have to have observability around that as well. And I also think is interesting because that there's a different set of metrics you use. I feel like so. For example, I was just reading through some of the docs and stuff. Like one interesting thing is, a lot of companies are racking up huge costs by making these like AI calls, AI API calls, right? And they're kind of like swallowing that cost for their customers, unless they're charging their customers, right? I don't, it depends on what your pricing model is. But I think a lot of companies need to then calculate how much cost they're accruing from that, which is
mm,
interesting. Another thing is like, there's these metrics called like what is it called faithfulness or like how because like AI is non-deterministic, right? So part of it is you have to measure how faithful or how like correct these AI responses are each time, even if they're being asked different variations of questions, which is also really interesting. And then I think there's like other things around measuring, like you can probably switch out like the models and use like Sonnet versus Gemini and things like that, and just see how well they benchmark. And so I don't know, it's a pretty interesting idea of like there's a obviously now a whole economy around like measuring how AI is doing, which I thought was pretty interesting.
ultimately, like not only would this save you money, but ideally you learn from these, things, and then you feed that back into your prompt or system prompt or the way you engineer things so that you cost yourself less money. You're getting more accurate answers. Seems super interesting. Well, you're right that there's so many tools popping up in this space, and I think that
Yeah.
that's
There's
one
like
of
a
the neat
whole
things to see.
economy that's being
Yeah,
created around this, which I've never really given too much thought to. Super
yeah.
cool.
It's cool to see like a lot of people going for the same area. Obviously, like
Yeah.
the AI app builders is the easiest one. Like it's almost every day I'm hearing about another one. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
we're like
I made
V0, but
$150,000.
Yeah, I heard Base 44 was just acquired by Wix,
Yeah.
and I hadn't even heard of Base 44, and it was like $80
Yes.
million acquisition or something. I'm like, in
Yeah.
6 months they built this company and bootstrapped it and sold it for
It's
80 million or
crazy.
something. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I guess that was the one to be in on. The
Too
employees
bad.
all got like $3 million, and I'm like, wow. I mean, how'd you
Would be
score that
nice.
job? You get
Yeah.
a job, work for 3 months, and get $3 million. I mean, it could be worse.
Would you, if you could join Base 44 knowing it was an incredibly toxic workplace, but that you would get the $3 million versus like working at Resend, would you have worked at Base 44? Just
I
random
mean,
question.
only if I knew that it was going to be 6 months, maybe.
Okay.
If it's an
So you would take
indeterminate
the,
number of time, yeah, I'd rather
yeah,
take a good work environment.
and you get and make the 3 million.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
if
okay.
it was horrible, but I knew it was going to be done in 3 months, I could do anything for
Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I do the same.
Yeah. My tool today is kibo-ui.com, kibo-ui.com. So basically, it takes Shadcey and UI and it builds on top of that a bunch of components that you'll use in AI chats. So as you like build AI chats, you can quickly grab these components. If you work with Shadcey and UI, you're just copying them to your code base. But they've got a bunch of things that you would normally use. So everything from like, I don't know, a drop zone items that you normally would have to build yourself, you can grab from Kibo-UI. So I just ran across this, but it seems super cool. Again, they have like AI message, AI inputs, the reasoning models, like choosing a model, like all that kind of built in as components that you can just pull in and then drop into your application. So with AI apps themselves being way more easy to build, like easier to build as we go here, I think it's super helpful to have these, primitives essentially that you can just plug in. And they've even got things like project management, like Gantt charts and
Oh my gosh.
Kanban boards, and it's kind of like takes Shadcey and UI to a whole new level. So I've been really
That's
enjoying this. I'm
see,
like, I need to play with this more.
that's what I'm saying. Like there's a whole economy. Like I never even thought about AI UI component. Like that's crazy. But it makes so much sense.
Yeah,
I don't know. This economy is just it's crazy. They should have a
yeah, it's
t-shirt. They should have a t-shirt with all of their UI components. I mean, I'm sure they probably do, but that'd be kind of cute.
it's a
Yeah.
lot of components. So it might be a busy T-shirt.
Front and back all around. Um,
Uh,
that's
that's
amazing.
cool.
Do you have anything to show and tell today, Chris?
I do. It's digital though. It's something I've gotten slightly addicted to. It's called cluesbysam.com. It's just like this little game every day
Okay.
where you play and it gives you a grid of like 20 characters and you have one clue that's revealed and you have to use that to deduce basically who's a criminal and who's an innocent. And so you use those to like
Oh,
logically deduce so it'll be like two people above Sam are innocents and there's four people above him. So that's like one piece of knowledge. And it'll be like a neighbor of whoever's is
I
an
love this.
innocent, but they're also, so I don't know. It's just, it's been fun to play with just the last couple of days. I ran across it, I think on Blue Sky,
I love that.
cluesbysam.com, but it's been really fun.
I will definitely do that because I love doing the New York Times, like
Yeah.
Wordle connections, strands.
Yeah.
And I'll just add that to my rotation.
I
That
built my
sounds fun.
own connections game with a friend like a couple years ago. It was pretty fun.
Yeah,
And yeah, and I've
yeah.
done, a lot of people have done their Wordle games too, but yeah, I
Wordle.
really like these kinds of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're so good at exploring all these different tools. Mine is always gonna be okay, mine I won my I won my football um championships.
Well, that
I
can't be a
I
downer.
my
Like,
woman I
I have something dumb. I won an entire championship. Only Jess would see that as a bad thing. I think
I think
that's a great thing to plug.
I think if I were to like make it more show and tell, I think I'll tell you one thing I learned, which
Okay.
is throughout the season, I've become much better at reading defense, and usually in football there's like one safety, and um, I tend to throw a lot of picks because I try to throw deep and the safety would pick it. And what I did really well was running routes and looking for the routes that were shorter, knowing that defense was backing up a little bit on me. So I think
Hmm.
there's a lot of things I feel like I'm learning every week in improving my football like IQ skills, which super niche. So I'm sorry to everyone listening to this. You could tune out now. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I play a lot of soccer and I coach a lot of soccer, and I think the number one thing I have to teach is like, and do myself, even when watching soccer, is like, don't watch the ball. Like the ball is the least
Yep.
important
Yep.
thing. It's
Yeah.
everything else going on. So from a coach's perspective, I have to be constantly looking at everything else,
Yeah.
thinking about structure, where people are moving, like what patterns the defense is taking up,
Yeah.
and like trying to read that. And like the best players in soccer and in all sports, like are very good at reading those
Yep.
quickly. They did this test on Lionel Messi, and basically in the first 10 to 13 minutes of the game, he spends like half of his time watching the defense, and like
Yep.
he moves here and sees what they do, and then he moves here and sees what they do. So like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
figuring out the patterns they're going to do, and then after 10 minutes, like if you haven't scored on him, like he's unlocked you, and so now he'll
Yeah.
know if he moves here, this is what the defense is going to do, this is how they'll shift, this is how they'll react. So a lot of times those first few minutes, if you watch him or good players, they're just constantly looking behind them, constantly moving
Yeah.
and seeing what the defense is doing. So that is a super important skill. And yeah, that's super fun to kind of
Oh my
unlock.
gosh.
And
I
there's
wish I
layers
wish
and
I could
layers to that.
talk with you about this for like an hour. Like we could anyways. We
New
won't, but
podcast.
so interesting. Okay, well, to wrap up, if you want to engage with us, you can always go onto our website or follow us on any of our socials. And feel free to drop any comments there or on this video. We are looking for any sorts of like things that scratch our brain in the right way or make us think or go, huh? Or you can, roast us. That's fun too. But otherwise, join us in for the next episode. And thanks, Chris.
Yep. See you later. Thanks.